And without further ado, I would very much like to introduce to you, Jacqueline Layton, who's a professor in educational psychology in the Faculty of Education. So we're so excited to hear from her today. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Elise, and welcome everyone. I am so pleased to be here. I was just telling the organizers that this is my first Festival of Teaching presentation. And so I am really excited to share some of the things that I've done this past year. Now, I want to just encourage you, if you feel comfortable, to put your videos on. I love to see people. It's one of the things that I've missed so much about all the Zooming that we've done over the past year. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, and that I've tried this past year, and I've never tried it before, is actually to create what I call open book, higher level thinking, multiple choice questions. And there are a couple of reasons why I did this. I'm going to, well, before I don't want to get ahead of myself. So just as a quick overview of thinking about this topic, I want to cover two basic things in my 15 minutes. First, why would you want to do this as an instructor? Because typically when we think about multiple choice, what we normally think about are questions that students write in class, and they're usually closed book. And the next item that I want to cover is, how do we do this on eClass? So I want to begin by, first of all, touching upon some misconceptions that I think usually get in the way of thinking about multiple choice as something that you can do in an open book manner. So the first myth is that open book exams are easy for students because all they have to do is look up the answers in the book. And this is actually a myth. And I can confidently say this is a myth because my area of research is assessment, and it is psychometrics, and a lot of my research is in test design. And specifically, one of the things that I look at are how to best create test items, assessments generally, that are actually going to be probing the constructs or the learning objectives that we want to get at through our teaching in a course. So this is a myth that I often hear from other instructors, that, well, open book exams they're actually not a good idea because they're really easy for students. Well, in fact, if you design a test for memory, then yes, this is usually what happens. It can be a very easy exam, and in some cases it can be unfair, because if a student is doing more than just memorizing, if they're trying to learn the material in a way that is much more comprehensive, and they're trying to elaborate the material, then a multiple choice exam actually penalizes the student because it's actually not testing for higher level thinking. However, if you create a multiple choice item that tests for higher level thinking, which I have been experimenting with this year, such as analysis and evaluation, for those of you who are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, then in fact, it's not that easy. And students take quite a bit of time to go through and think through all the options in order to be able to generate the answer. Another myth is that multiple choice questions cannot test higher level thinking. This is a very common misconception that I hear a lot. And the fact is that it really, again, all depends on how you create the question. There are going to be questions that are essentially just going to be testing memory or test wiseness. And this is something that typically, if you are trying to get at something much more meaningful in your assessments of students, you want to avoid. But in fact, if you create a test question that is specifically designed for higher level thinking, then you can in fact do something that is going to test a lot more than just test wiseness, and also avoid simple memory recall. And the third myth is that students will cheat. And this is actually an interesting one that I've thought about, because one of the things, and maybe this is something that we can touch upon in the Q&A, is that I actually give students a lot of time to do the assessments. And I do that for a number of reasons. And I'm going to talk about universal design for learning in a moment. But when I think about students cheating, this is the way that I think about it. Students can in principle cheat on any assessment, first of all. If a student is bent on cheating, they're going to figure out a way. So what I would rather do as an instructor, as somebody who actually wants to focus on the learning, is actually inspire and motivate them to really engage with the assessment so that they don't feel like they have to cheat. And one of the ways that I try to do that is by trying to make my assessments as fair as possible for all students. And this is where UDL comes into play. So why have I sort of been thinking about all this past year? Well, we were motivated to do a lot of different things remotely with the shift, with the pandemic and the shift to remote delivery. I used to do this class largely face-to-face. And also the assessments that I did were largely in class, closed book. But because of the difficulties that many students were experiencing, and also some of the problems with the technology, including remote proctoring, I wanted to do something different, something that was not only beneficial to the students, but also beneficial to our engagement and our interaction in class. Because if there is one thing that I've learned about any kind of online teaching, and I used to do hybrid teaching as well, or blended learning is another term for it, is that whenever there are technology problems, students begin to not only resent the course, but they begin to disengage. And so one of the principles when I do any kind of teaching is to try and simplify, but not make it simplistic. I think there's an important difference. So what I try to do is simplify the design of what I do, not only for students on eClass, but also now my assessments. And so because of the COVID shift and our transfer to remote delivery, I wanted to do the same thing for my assessments. So I was motivated by this shift to remote learning, and also very mindful that whatever I did in terms of these open book, multiple choice questions, that I needed to make them aligned with the learning objectives. Now, I'm quite mindful that this design, this test item design, or this type of assessment may not actually work in all courses, but it worked, I think, at least I've had very good results, in EdPsych, the two classes that I teach, which are large section courses in child development and adolescent development. And these courses are undergraduate courses, and they are taught for pre-service teachers in our professional teacher education program in the Faculty of Education. More importantly as well, and well, not more importantly, but certainly very connected to having the items aligned with learning objectives, is that I have been increasingly inspired, motivated, learning about how to create all my learning, all the materials in my class, all the assessments informed by universal design for learning principles. And you will find a lot of different things about UDL online. There are a lot of books that are written about it, and there are a lot of fancy charts that are presented. But fundamentally, what universal design for learning requires us as instructors to do is think differently about the way that we teach. And this is actually very freeing. In fact, I enjoy my teaching more now than I ever did before, in part because UDL actually informs so much of what I do in the class. And really, with UDL, we begin by thinking, what are we here to do? Fundamentally, what am I trying to get across to all the students in terms of constructs, learning objectives? And then you go through all these different ideas. So, for example, what are we here to do fundamentally? And the very next thing is, what are some potential barriers to this type of learning? Because if there is a barrier, then that is going to get in the way of the very fundamental thing that I'm trying to do as an instructor in class. In any case, there are a variety of aspects to UDL that then begin to inform the way that you think. And the reason that I like the idea of UDL informing the way that we think, more so than just sort of like a recipe for how to do things, is because our teaching domains are constantly changing. Our students are changing. And so I don't think it's beneficial to just have a recipe book for how to do things. I think that we need to actually change our thinking, our frame of reference in terms of the way that we look at students and we look at the interaction between students and instructors, and certainly the assessments that we create. The other aspect of universal design for learning that I think is really important, especially during COVID, was that there were many different needs that I wanted to be able to support students in. So I knew that some of them were coming from different educational backgrounds. I also knew that they were in different time zones. I also know that some students don't like online learning. Some prefer face-to-face. Others may have difficulty or language being a potential barrier. And I had experienced a number of different issues such as these in my face-to-face classes, but they were amplified in the online environment. So for all of these reasons, doing something that was open book and and multiple choice, because it's also very objectively scored, allowed me to do a couple of things with students. Number one, give them an opportunity to not get really stressed out about multiple choice exams, because many students are. The other thing that this format also allowed me to do was to actually invest some time in actually creating my own test items. Typically, when we do these multiple choice tests, we use publisher test banks. And they're usually really bad. The items are bad. And I had used them in the past and students were always complaining. And so I instead began to focus on just being able to create my own and link them to the learning objectives, link them to the PowerPoint, link them to the lecture. And also the nice thing is that in eClass, there are a number of features that I find fabulous to be able to provide feedback to students in this process. And students also, I learned, really like the process based on the evaluation results, and then also some of the feedback that I got in class. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen because I'd like to be able to show you. Actually, before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you. So the very first thing that we do, maybe what I'll is that the way that we would create this kind of open book multiple choice assessment is in eClass, you would add an activity, and the activity would be a quiz. So you would go to your eClass, add a quiz, and then from there, you can begin to create a number of different features. And this is where I think it might be better if I stop sharing and I show you what I've done. So this is my EdPsych 304 class. And I'm just going to show you very quickly what I've done here. So it's designed by week. I'm going to show you the module exam 2. And all of the open book, so I'm going to show you this. So this is the quiz that I created, okay? And I'm going to show you essentially what I do. This is, I do 10 questions. Each of the questions is actually designed explicitly to be associated with certain learning objectives from the module that we have covered. And I'll show you what it would look like here. So here we have the very first question, and we enter the question text. That's straightforward. And so this is something that I've created. This is not from a test bank. So the question might read like this. During class discussion, we highlighted Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model as showing the transactional nature of multiple levels of influence on human development. The model conceptualizes adolescence as nested within 4 levels, blah, 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 right? And then we get to the point in the question where this is what the student is supposed to be answering. Does this mean that the influence of the family on the adolescent is equivalent to the influence of peers, school, religious institutions, and health services on the adolescent? Now the student, notice here in the general feedback, this is where I tell the student the difficulty level, and the week that we covered this in, and the lecture slides that this actually is associated with. Now, obviously, the student doesn't see that when they're completing the quiz. This is something that would be feedback that is automatically given to the student after they have finished the quiz and they've received their grade. Okay, so then we have the answers here. The first choice is yes, all the variables in the microsystem. So it might be one answer, it's the wrong answer. And then here in feedback, I write out why this is the wrong answer, okay? And this is where students are able to see this feedback when they are reviewing their quizzes after they have received their grades. So if they have chosen choice 1, eClass will let them know that it was actually the incorrect answer, but then instead of not knowing why it is incorrect, they are able to use the feedback and understand why it's not the correct answer. Okay, so then we do that for all of the choices, right? Except for the one that is actually correct. And the response is obviously outlined within choice 4. We indicate that the grade is 100%. And then even in the feedback, there is further explanation about why this is the best answer, okay? Now, that's just the mechanics of it. How do we begin to create these items? Well, one of the things, and this is where it's important to understand the nature of what it is that you're trying to get your students to learn within the course. I highlight in the course outline for my students that it's not just we're not just going to learn about child development. We're going to learn how to critically think about theories of child development, how to apply theories of development to children within families or classrooms. And so I tell them in the actual syllabus that not to expect the multiple choice to be something where they can sort of, run through in 10 minutes and be able to be done with it. They have to think through each of the options and also the question. In a way, the item STEM can be considered almost the type of item STEM that you might have for an essay or even a long answer. But in fact, instead of having the long answer, which is very difficult and time consuming to grade, we have the options that are not necessarily short little responses. They're not pithy little responses, but they are not so long that students are going to take too long to actually finish the exam. But they do have to think through not only the item, but each of the options and really think through, why is this correct, or why is this the best answer and not the other ones? Because that's something else in the instructions to the assessment that I make sure students understand, that we are not testing for correct and correct. That's very basic, right? At this level, I tell them there are a number of options that can be correct. So your task is to select the best answer from among the options. One of the things that the students, as I was saying, need to understand is that we're trying to do something that is higher level. They're going to have to think through all of the options that are not correct are actually tied to misconceptions associated with the item and the concept that we're testing. And when they're reviewing their exam, they are able to see the feedback. Now, this is what I just want to give you a very quick picture of what students would see when they're actually reviewing their test items. So they actually have the feedback associated with the one that is incorrect, and then they also they're able to see at the very bottom the difficulty level and also when we covered it, etc. I've gotten very good distributions with these assessments. And what I found is that I only need 10 questions to be able to cover the learning objectives in a meaningful way. And the other thing too is that eClass is able to give some really good information about the facility or difficulty index, as well as this discriminative efficiency. And so you're able to monitor how your multiple choice items are working. Okay, so maybe I'll stop there. Like, I think this is, there's a lot of investment that goes into it, but I have found that it's very much worthwhile in terms of student feedback and how students do, and also the level of stress in the course.